The Detroit Lions just made a move that's getting way more criticism than it actually deserves, and when you really break it down, it tells you a lot about how this front office operates and why this team keeps putting itself in position to win. Because right now, behind the scenes, there's something happening that fans need to understand clearly before jumping to conclusions. An anonymous NFL executive came out and gave high praise to Detroit's 2026 draft, and one comment in particular stands out above the rest. According to that executive, the Lions landed the best offensive tackle in the entire draft with Blake Miller. That's not a small statement, that's not media hype, that's someone inside the league looking at all the options available and saying Detroit got the top guy at his position. And yet, despite that, there's still noise from the outside saying this was a reach, that the Lions took him too early, that there were better value picks on the board. But here's where things start to get interesting, because this isn't the first time we've heard that exact same narrative. Think about it for a second. We heard the same thing about Jahmyr Gibbs. We heard the same thing about Dan Campbell. We heard it about Sam Laporta. And now, looking back, those takes didn't age well at all. In fact, if you redo those drafts today, those players go significantly higher. So when people immediately label a pick as a reach, what they're really doing is comparing Detroit's internal evaluation to a public consensus that has been wrong before. Brad Holmes is not building this roster based on what draft analysts think. He's building it based on fit, identity, and long-term development. And Blake Miller fits exactly what this offensive line needs. Plugging him in on the right side doesn't just fill a gap, it potentially completes one of the most important units on this team. Now shift that into the bigger picture. The Lions already have a strong offensive identity. They want to run the football, control the tempo, and protect Jared Goff. Adding a high-level tackle reinforces that identity in a major way. This isn't just about one player, it's about solidifying the foundation of the entire offense. But while that's happening, there's another conversation gaining traction that's a bit more complicated. The idea of adding Taysom Hill has been floated as a possible free agency move, and on paper it sounds intriguing. A versatile player who can line up at tight end, take snaps at quarterback, and bring a different dynamic to the offense. However, when you actually look at the current roster, it's not as simple as it sounds. The quarterback room is already set with Jared Goff and Teddy Bridgewater, and a third option likely heading to the practice squad, so Hill wouldn't be coming in to compete there. At tight end, you've got Sam Laporta, Tyler Conklin, Brock Wright, and Zach Horton. That's already a solid group. Could Hill replace someone like Horton? Sure. But then you have to ask if the marginal upgrade is worth the roster shuffle and the contract, even if it's relatively affordable. Because that's the key here. It's not about whether the Lions can sign him. Financially, they could make it work. The real question is whether it actually improves the team in a meaningful way, or if it just adds a name without solving a real need. And right now, this front office has shown that they're not interested in making moves just for the sake of it. Every addition has a purpose. Every decision ties back to the bigger vision of the roster. At the same time, another storyline is quietly developing that could have emotional weight for fans. Taylor Decker, a longtime piece of this offensive line, is still out there in free agency, and there's talk about a potential fit with the Chicago Bears. Now, from a player perspective, this is business. Opportunities don't always come from ideal places. But from a fan perspective, seeing a former Lion in a division rival's uniform would definitely feel different. Even Decker himself has hinted that it wouldn't sit completely right with him, which tells you everything about his connection to Detroit. Still, reality in the NFL is harsh. If that's where the opportunity is, players take it, and it raises a bigger question about how fans should react when loyalty and career decisions collide. So when you step back and look at everything happening right now, you've got a team coming off a strong draft that's being validated internally across the league, a front office staying disciplined in free agency, and a division landscape where Detroit is still being viewed as the team to beat. But the noise is still there. The doubts about draft choices, the curiosity about potential signings, the uncertainty around former players. And that brings it back to you, because this is where your perspective matters the most. Do you trust what Brad Holmes is building enough to ignore the outside criticism, or do you still have concerns about the direction after this draft? Because this is really where the conversation gets deeper, and honestly, more interesting. Trust isn't built overnight in the NFL, it's built through patterns. And what we're seeing from this Detroit front office is a very clear pattern forming, one that doesn't always align with public opinion in the moment, but consistently proves itself over time. When Brad Holmes and this staff make a decision, it's rarely about short-term validation. It's about long-term impact. That's why moves that initially feel questionable often end up looking like calculated wins a year or two down the line. And that's exactly why the Blake Miller situation shouldn't be viewed in isolation. It's part of a larger philosophy that prioritizes identity over hype. Now, let's connect that to what this roster could actually look like once everything settles. If Miller develops the way the organization believes he will, you're potentially looking at an offensive line that becomes one of the most complete units in the league again. And that matters more than almost anything else, because everything this offense wants to do starts up front. Think about Jared Goff in this system. When he's protected, when the run game is working, he's efficient, he's confident, and he keeps the offense on schedule. The Lions don't need him to play hero ball every snap. They need him to execute within structure, and a dominant offensive line allows exactly that. And then there's the ripple effect. A stronger run game doesn't just help the offense move the chains, it controls the clock, keeps the defense fresh, and forces opponents to play a style they might not be comfortable with. That's how Detroit has been winning games, and that's how they want to keep winning. Which brings us back to the idea of adding someone like Taysom Hill. On the surface, versatility sounds appealing, but when you already have a system that works, adding a gadget piece can sometimes disrupt more than it enhances. It's not about whether Hill is talented, because he is. It's about whether his role would be clearly defined and consistently impactful in this specific offense. Right now, the Lions don't lack creativity. They lack nothing in terms of offensive identity. So introducing a player who thrives in hybrid roles would require adjustments. And the question becomes whether those adjustments are worth it when the current structure is already effective. And this is where discipline separates good teams from great ones. It's easy to get tempted by big names or unique skill sets. It's much harder to stay committed to what you've built and only make moves that truly elevate the roster. At the same time, the Taylor-Decker situation adds another layer to this entire discussion, because while the team is moving forward, there are still emotional ties to players who helped build this foundation. Decker wasn't just another name on the roster, he was part of the identity shift that brought Detroit back into relevance. If he does end up signing with a division rival like Chicago, it's going to create a strange dynamic. Not because it changes Detroit's trajectory, but because it challenges the emotional connection fans have with players who were once seen as untouchable pieces of the team. But again, this is the reality of the league. Teams evolve, rosters change, and front offices have to make decisions that aren't always easy, but are necessary to keep moving forward. So when you tie all of this together, what you're really looking at is a franchise that knows exactly who it is. A team that isn't chasing validation, isn't reacting to outside pressure, and isn't making impulsive moves just to stay in headlines. They're building with purpose, and more importantly, they're sticking to that plan even when it's unpopular. And that's the real story here. Not whether a pick was a reach, not whether a free agent could be added, but whether this approach continues to put Detroit in position to compete at the highest level. Because if history is any indication, this is a front office that's more comfortable being right later than being praised now. And this is where things get even more real, because pushing for a championship isn't just about making noise in the offseason, it's about timing. The Lions are in that window right now, but they're also trying to keep that window open for more than just one season. That's the balance they're managing. If you go all in too early, you risk sacrificing depth, flexibility, and future stability. If you play it too safe, you risk wasting a prime opportunity. What Brad Holmes is doing is walking that line very carefully, making sure this team is not just competitive now, but sustainable moving forward. Look at the core of this roster. It's not built on aging stars nearing the end. It's built on players either in their prime or entering it. That changes how aggressive you need to be. You don't have to force a last push move when your foundation is still strong and getting better. And that's why decisions like passing on a flashy free agent or sticking with their draft board matter more than people realize. It's not hesitation, it's confidence. Confidence in development, confidence in coaching, and confidence in the system they've built. At the same time, expectations are different now. This isn't the same Detroit team from a few years ago that was just trying to compete. This is a team that people expect to win, to contend, to make deep playoff runs. And with that comes pressure, not just from fans, but from inside the building as well. Players feel it, coaches feel it, and every move, or even every move not made, gets amplified because of it. So when fans question a draft pick or debate a potential signing, it's not just criticism, it's a reflection of how much the standard has changed. And in a way, that's a good thing. It means Detroit is no longer being overlooked. It means every decision actually matters in the bigger picture of chasing a title. But here's the key point that can't be ignored. The Lions haven't given anyone a real reason to doubt their process yet. Not in a meaningful, sustained way. Every time there's been skepticism, they've answered it with results on the field. That doesn't guarantee future success. Nothing does in the NFL. But it does earn them the benefit of the doubt, at least until proven otherwise. So now it becomes a matter of patience versus urgency. Do you trust that this methodical approach will lead to a championship, or do you feel like this is the moment to take bigger swings, even if it comes with more risk? Because one thing is certain, the Lions are no longer building towards something hypothetical. They're building towards something very real, and every decision from this point forward carries even more weight than the last. And that weight is exactly what separates teams that are close from teams that actually finish the job. Because once you reach this stage, it's no longer just about talent or scheme. It's about execution under pressure, about depth holding up when injuries hit, and about whether your roster was constructed with enough foresight to handle the unexpected. That's where Detroit's approach becomes even more important. This isn't a team built on shortcuts. It's built on layers. Every position group has been reinforced with competition, with versatility, and with players who fit a very specific mold. And that's not by accident. That's intentional roster architecture. Take the offensive line again as the clearest example. If Blake Miller becomes what they believe he can be, you're not just plugging a hole, you're creating stability across the entire unit. That allows the coaching staff to keep the playbook open, to stay balanced, and to dictate games instead of reacting to them. And when you can dictate games in the NFL, you control outcomes more often than not. But let's not ignore the other side of this. Because while the offense gets a lot of attention, the real test for this team moving forward is whether the defense can match that identity consistently. That's been the difference in big moments. Not the ability to score, but the ability to get stops when it matters most. And this is where the draft, again, quietly plays a role. It may not have been flashy, it may not have grabbed headlines, but if even a couple of those defensive additions develop into reliable contributors, that changes the entire ceiling of this team. Suddenly, you're not just winning games, you're closing them out. That's how championship teams are built, not just with stars, but with dependable pieces across the board. Players who may not always be in the spotlight, but show up in critical situations. Now bring that back to the idea of making a big move, like adding a player with a unique profile or going after a name that creates buzz. The question isn't whether it would excite fans, because it would. The question is whether it would truly strengthen those critical layers of the roster, or just sit on top of what's already there. Because at this level, small imbalances can cost you everything. One weak spot, one miscalculation, one move that doesn't fully align with your identity, and it shows up at the worst possible time. That's why the Lions are being so calculated. That's why they're willing to let opportunities pass if they don't check every box. And that's why, even with the pressure building, they're not abandoning the blueprint that got them here. So now, everything shifts from evaluation to validation. The draft picks will need to prove themselves. The current roster will need to take another step.